Alright, so welcome back to another review. This time, we're taking a look at the AudioTechnica R70Xs. So everybody's been hogging me to get my hands on these bad boys. They claim, it's the upgrade to the HD 600 line if you don't want the 660S2s. So I was like, okay bruv, we'll see about that. Well, wait no further, because here they are. And I definitely have a few words to say about these boys. So contents, pretty simple contents here. I mean, you got the headphones themselves, pretty simple and straightforward. A long, dual 2.5mm tip ring sleeve to 3.5mm cable, a 3.5mm to 1/4 inch screw-on adapter. You get a nice little velvet pouch here to store your headphones. And of course, the warranties, the manuals, the whole ordeal. Now, build quality is pretty interesting here. So these are built pretty decently. These feel pretty nice in hand. They're made out of plastic mostly. This part right here, the headband, is made out of metal. Everything else is pretty much just plastic, except for the grills. These are metal as well. Now, the pads themselves are it's kind of strange. It's like a slightly more, not so much plush. It's a lot more stiff velour, but for some reason, it just kind of works, and we'll get to that in the comfort section. Now, these are very, very open. If you can tell, I mean, that's the driver right there. And they're very, very lightweight as well. Super awesome. Now, the headband does feature a bit of a bungee strap mechanism type deal, but it's not your typical bungee strap. It's two pads sitting on the side here. And guess what? You put it on, you don't need to adjust the size of anything. It just adjusts for you. It becomes as big as your head is. There's no need to do anything. It's amazing is what it is. Now, I'm sure these will last for years to come. I can't help but wonder how long these hinges will last though. This is probably going to be the weakest part of the headphones themselves. But that being said, they're actually pretty reliable. They don't feel like they're going to break on me anytime soon. It's pretty cool. Now let's talk about some comfort here. Right off the bat, these look very comfortable. Now, I must congratulate AudioTechnica on making such a compact, lightweight headphone that also feels very solid and robust. They stay close to the head, which means these barely ever shift around. Even with glasses, I tend to wear all types of glasses. I find that these are very, very comfortable and easy to wear. I barely ever get fatigue from wearing these, and if I do, it's not because of my glasses. It's just the general headphone fatigue, like, hey, you gotta take them off for a bit. Now, these do feature a bit more clamp force than I would care for, to be completely honest. Given their lightweight nature, I would have liked these to have a just slightly, more relaxed fit to them. I will say, the cups on these headphones are quite small. So if you're someone with larger ears, I would probably think twice. If ears not fitting within the pads is kind of a deal breaker for you, kind of like with the HiFiMAN Sundaras. Me personally, I've got smaller ears. This is as small as I would go. Or HiFiMAN Sundara, that's as small as I would go. Anything smaller than that, that's an on-ear, man. That's not an over-ear headphone. So in most people's cases, do be aware that you won't really get a good seal with these. When I put them on, only the top forms a seal around my ears. However, I'm pretty certain that this doesn't really change the sound of the headphone whatsoever. Now let's go ahead and talk about amplification on these a bit. So these feature like 470 ohms of impedance and a sensitivity level of 98 decibels. These are definitely harder to drive. On my THX AAA 789, I drive these at around 11:30-ish, sometimes noon on gain 2. Now, let's dig into the sound. So as usual, I'll be testing these single-ended in stock form. We'll be talking a little more about EQ in the notes and observations portion after the general sound signature portion. So let's start off with the bass, right? Mid-bass can be a bit too warm and forward sometimes. A good example is just about any metal song, particularly looking into like kick drums and any of the Trivium tracks that I can think of. A great one to bring up in this case is The Hammer by Deathclock. This track sounds intentionally warm in the mid bass due to the bass guitar pairing with the electric guitar and creating that like heavy chugging sound. Now the bad part about mixing it like this though is that the mid bass becomes a tad too meaty and warm with headphones that are on the warmer side like the R70Xs. Now besides that, they've got some pretty decent definition. On the warmer side, sure, but a bit overbearing on tracks that really bring that low end forward. I would definitely say that out of the entire spectrum, I'd say the bass is definitely the star of the show on these. Not that they're bass cannons, but they're definitely bass present. Now bass guitars do sound a tad bit tubby to my ears. Bass extension is present, but just barely. In my usual test track, Zealots of Stockholm by Childish Gambino, you could really hear that note go all the way down and dissipate at 305, but it's almost inaudible. It's on the weaker side of things. You can hear it, but you can't feel it. Now drums do sound a bit fuller than average, but still within reason and decently defined. As for electronic bass, this actually does sound pretty pleasant in the sub-bass region. The portions that are represented sound neutral and vibrant. When you get into the mid-bass though, I feel like it just becomes a tad too much at that point. Now let's go into the mids here. These are overall pretty flat and unintrusive. I found it pretty hard to say that one particular instrument within the mid-range stood out a little too far above everything else, or too far back. Now you'll find that vocals don't really stand out in front of everything else. They're part of the entire ensemble, in line with like cellos, brass, etc. They're also not very abrasive either. Cellos, I will say, sound pretty accurate. They don't stand out or make any waves, they just exist. They do exhibit a little of that detail heard when running the bow across the strings. A good balance of like the presence, the accuracy, and the detail present within the notes. Now look, people will hate me, but the only way I can really describe the timbre and presence of these is standard. I know, it's like, what do you mean by that? Well, honestly, I can't describe it any other way except for standard. It sounds as it should, I think. Now let's talk about treble here. This is pretty neutral as well, not very offensive. I really don't detect any sort of sibilance coming from the consonant region here, so they're definitely an easier listen when it comes to the high end. I even busted out, The Art of Shredding by Pantera, specifically the deluxe album version that was remastered to be extra souped up in the highs and the lows. Like it's supposed to just hit you with the detail and the crispiness of the highs, the punchiness of the lows. It's supposed to be really impactful, which is, well, kind of how you want to hear metal music, right? Now the cymbals and hi-hats come across more pronounced as intended, but they still don't bring out any sort of sibilance or harshness present with other headphones that might be a little more treble heavy. These even bring out that like coin rubbing sound in Thunderhorse by Deathclock that you feel at the back of your throat. However, it's not in your face either. It's just yet another instrument in the mix. Present, but part of the whole. Well pronounced, but not overly done. Now let's touch on soundstage and imaging. So our soundstage here is definitely on the average to narrow side of things. They're definitely not claustrophobic in any way, but not this ultra-wide field to play around in either. Imaging though, good God. I mean, okay, look. First of all, these sound remarkably open, like I said. They look open, they sound open. Then, add the fact that imaging is stellar on these, and you're gonna have a real good time. You won't believe me, of course you won't, but these get almost as good as the Sennheiser HD 800S, except of course, these have a, much smaller soundstage. I'll bring up the food on a plate analogy again, right? Imagine an average sized plate in front of you. Now let's load it up with some food. You got your scrambled eggs in there, you got some beans, some diced potatoes, some, salsa or some dip here. Now on most headphones, the food tends to overlap on top of each other. And even though you're clearly able to tell the difference between, mashed potatoes and beans, there is that mix that's going on where the mashed potatoes and beans, you scoop some of it and it's both, right? They kind of blend in around the areas where they meet. On the R70X, this just doesn't happen. Everything is clearly divided within each space. There's a very clear border of where one instrument ends and the other one begins. It's very, very easy to pinpoint across the Z-axis. Well, across all 3 axes. Now let's dig into the notes and observations here. So here are the EQ settings I would personally apply to the R70X. The most important piece here is bringing down the mid bass a bit, just so the 100 to 180-ish, 160 range is brought down a bit, made it a little more humble, not so meaty, not so warm, not so present. Just cool these down a bit. Next, you can add a little bit of sub-bass presence here if you want. So I punched up the 40 to 63 hertz range a little bit, and then added a bass shelf at everything below 40 hertz. It's not necessary, but if you're listening to electronic tracks where that sub-bass really comes into play and you want to hear the rumble, I personally appreciated it. That being said, I don't think these really take that change very, very well, but it's still an improvement. Now last is that high end. This is very, very unnecessary, but I kind of wanted a little bit of extra zing, a little bit of extra presence in those cymbals and hi-hats without introducing sibilance, so just a little bit, this is the way to go. So let's conclude here, right? I was very pleasantly surprised with these. With the exception of the low end being a little bit too meaty, these headphones are very well controlled across the spectrum and are a very viable candidate for someone looking for the most neutral listening experience available, whether that be for enjoyment purposes or professional studio use. Now, I'll be frank, from a personal standpoint, I found these to be a bit too neutral for enjoyment. I would pop these on and get listening, and I'd appreciate what I heard. I was like, wow, the detail, the presence, the accuracy, wow. But after a while, I found myself eyeing some other headphone from my collection, and then just wanting to listen to those instead. Even after applying some EQ, the word engaging never really came to mind with these. But would I keep them as a tool if I were producing music on a serious level, even as a hobby? I absolutely would. I really, really would. Now, here's what's next. Keep an eye out for the next video where I compare these to my tried and true HD600 and the Focal LX, which haven't been featured in this channel for quite some time. But anyway, that's going to conclude this review of the AudioTechnica R70Xs. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, ciao. Give me that.